Our latest episode of Explore the World International Careers. And we have a treat today because we have two speakers who are going to talk about their international careers. And it's very interesting if you look at the education, the experience, the travel that they all undertook to put them in the position where they can have the careers that they do. They are both living and working in Krakow, Poland, but neither of them has spent their entire lives there. So it's their careers in some sense. Well, my son, I guess out of full disclosure, I need to let you know that one of the speakers, Conrad Patterson, is my son. And the other speaker is his partner, Katarina Kochergina. And they are the parents of my first and only grandson, Alex. So let's not be too noisy. I don't want to wake him up, right? Good. Okay, so our first speaker, I'm going to introduce both of them, and then they will speak. And if you have questions, please put them into the chat, and I will field them afterwards. So our first speaker is Katarina Kochergina. Katya. She works as a strategic buyer for the maritime division within Kongsberg Group, a Norwegian international technology company. She manages purchasing processes, which include market research, cost analysis, contract negotiation, suppliers, relationship development, and maintenance. And her job involves a lot of traveling, which she enjoys because it exposes her to different business cultures and allows her to visit new places. She has a bachelor's degree in finance with honors from Odessa National Economic University in Ukraine and a master's in international economics from the University of Warsaw in Poland and ISCTE University of Lisbon. Apart from studying in Poland and Portugal, she also spent 2 summers in New York City working at the Statue of Liberty. After finishing her studies, she took some time off, went to Tanzania, volunteering at a local NGO. Currently, she's a full-time parent of a 4-year-old son, Alex, who is sleeping.
4 months old.
4-month-old. Sorry, yes. Following Katya, Conrad Patterson will speak. He works as a data analyst for UBS, a Swiss investment bank and financial service company with a global presence. His department, Evidence Lab, is a team of experts that harvests, cleanses, and analyzes alternative data sourced from the internet. Their job is to produce insight-ready data sets to help clients around the world make better investment decisions. For the past 10 plus years, he has also been working as a contractor tasked with keeping the US government abreast on what's happening in Poland and the EU. He monitors the Polish media, translates articles into English, and writes summary reports highlighting news of interest to the US government. Conrad has a master's in environmental science from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, a master's in European studies from the Jagiellonian University in Poland, and a BA in political science from Carleton College in Minnesota. Apart from living in the UK and Poland, he's also spent several years in Singapore and Japan as a kid. In his free time, he loves to hike, climb, run, birdwatch, and read science fiction. He currently lives in Krakow, Poland, together with his partner Katya and their son, Alex. So with no more ado, Katya, please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Tom. So yeah, I would just briefly mention a few words about my, background and the place I was born. On the very first pictures you can see, I wouldn't rather mention it, but I'm really kind of proud of it because it's one of the oldest towns in Europe. It was set by Greek settlers in the 4th century before Christ, and it's also known as Akerman, although the current name of the city is Belgorod-Dnistrovsk. So this is the town, very provincial town I'm coming from. And as mentioned by Tom, I finished a bachelor degree in finance from Odessa National Economic University, and spent one summer, the first summer, after this 3rd year of my bachelor in the States. And that was like a tipping point for myself, because I would never think before that point in my life that I would move abroad, that I'm gonna look for opportunities to try to study, to see the world, to see what I can find there, to see the places, to try international career as it happened to me. So that's why I put the really bright this work and travel USA experience, because this is something that opened me up, that I realized that the world is so big and I want to see and experience actually more of it than Ukraine that back then could offer. So after that, I decided to move away, and I was looking for masters, and my choice was Warsaw University because of this double degree program, which was really interesting for me because I could spend 1 year in Warsaw and another year in the partner university, which happened to be ISKTE in Lisbon. And the program was really challenging, but really fulfilling. So I made some connections. I was focused on energy economics, which was my interest. And that's why afterwards I found this NGO in Tanzania and volunteered there for a few months. After that, I came back to Poland. Why actually I came back to Poland? That's tricky for me as non-EU citizen. And thanks to this diploma from Warsaw University, I have a right to work in Poland. Otherwise, I wouldn't have access to labor market in the EU. And that's why I got back to Poland originally, and there I found my first job. So a few words about Krakow. As you can see on the map, it's on the south of the country. The city was already built and settled by people in the 7th century. Interesting that this is one of very few cities that wasn't destroyed during the Second World War. So we still have the beautiful architecture of Old Town, of Kazimierz area, which are also right now on the list of UNESCO heritage sites. It's a very beautiful city. Moreover, since 10-15 years, as I read in some statistics and ranking, city is becoming more and more international and very attractive for companies, for global companies to come and open their business service centers here. On this picture, you can see, as I found the data from 2018, this information with the main companies who are present in Krakow, mainly in Krakow, also in other cities, but in Krakow. The biggest service centers are there. And one of those companies is Rolls-Royce, is the company where I got my first job, my only job so far. And that's, I started as a graduate, from a graduate development program in procurement. That was really attractive to me because the program was supposed to expose their participants to different areas of business, mainly within purchasing, procurement, but also to the sales, to how company works inside. So the focus is really develop people who would after stick around for, let's say, 5-10 years Therefore, the development path was already, let's say, prepared for you. So the first attachment of mine was within indirect purchasing department. I would just maybe briefly tell what is the difference, because there are two main divisions, indirect and direct purchasing or procurement. So indirect is focused on buying, contracting, maintaining and managing suppliers who deliver you goods or services that are not anyhow related to the final product that you sell to your customer. As an example, we can think of, for example, our offices, real estate, right? You need to have an office, at least before COVID, people didn't work at home that much. So you need to have a building that is rented. Mainly they are rented, at least from our company, we rent all the facilities, we don't own them. Or another example, it can be coffee machine, right? People like coffee, people have coffee machines in the office everywhere, especially in Norway. No one's gonna go and work for you if you don't provide them with coffee. So this is example of indirect purchasing, which was my first function. And I highlighted few like biggest, let's say, projects that I worked within first attachment that lasted for 6-7 months. And few pictures are from Norway, because already during the second month of my experience of me working for Rolls-Royce, I got a chance to go to Norway, to their center in Ålesund, and focus on the projects that I was involved in. It's interesting experience, because as I know from my colleagues, it's not there necessarily the case that you are obliged to go and travel within purchasing. But if you are interested, and if of course there is a business need, you're more than welcome to go, because procurement purchasing is a lot about maintaining the relationships with people, letting them feel comfortable with you, especially in indirect, because with indirect purchasing, the issue is that you don't rely on, as I mentioned before, there is no final product that you're supposed to sell to the customer. So you rely only on the stakeholders who actually use the tools or the buildings, right? The coffee machines, let's say, right? And you try to figure out whether this is the best supplier, whether in fact you can consolidate them maybe with something else. Why we have 10 suppliers for the same commodity across different sites in Norway. So that was my task, to figure this out, to talk to people, to gather data, because unfortunately sometimes the system cannot provide you with a good enough data. So when you talk to people who actually work with these suppliers, you get data from them, you meet with the suppliers, obviously, which is very important. You get to know the business better, you get to know your product better, you understand where the costs are, you have better relationship with the supplier, and when it comes to their signing of agreement with the supplier, you feel much more comfortable and you're like equipped with enough data to get where you want. But not only where you want, but also that the supplier is, let's say, happy, because it's a win-win game from both sides. Yeah, so that was my first attachment. The second attachment was indirect procurement, and here I just added like let's say the graph or the steps, the process of direct procurement, which is slightly or rather different from indirect, because usually you are assigned to a particular category, let's say electrical and automation and control, or steel or casting, right? So there you have to really know your products well. You have to understand the technical specifications. You have to know the sales, how they sell the product, what are the main features. Every time the customer, it's a new project with the customer. So you always have sales that already signed the contract with the customer, with the final customer, and then sales come back to you saying that this is what we need. So please buy this for us, please find the best product, and this is the budget that they already signed with the customer. So you also have a certain constraint that you have to fit in. And this is a challenge sometimes, because there was times, not in my experience, but as I know from my colleagues, that their target for the budget was really tight. But this is the challenges that you can have in any job, and this is the challenge with the purchasing jobs. So as I mentioned, here you establish the need, which is basically the customer signed the contract, the sale contract. You develop procurement strategy. What it means is basically that you should know your market, and you should more or less know where to look for the right supplier to deliver that or another part. You send the request for quotation based on their technical requirements and parameters provided by the business. You evaluate them, you discuss with their stakeholders, with the engineers. So again, quite a lot of traveling involved in that to make sure everything works. And you choose the best offer from the supplier, and you sign the contract either for this particular sales, so either with only for this customer, or you have a contract with the supplier for continuous delivery for the part that would be also potentially sold to other customers. So it's very much various, especially in marine business that I'm working for. I didn't know that, in fact, when you purchase things and your company, like Rolls-Royce in the past, they produce the engine. It's not actually the engine that is produced by our sites in Norway or Finland or Sweden. Actually, we are purchasers. We have to get right suppliers to deliver different components that afterwards are going to be just assembled on our sites in Norway. And the job of Rolls-Royce is develop the right technical specifications. So we have really good engineers who know their products, who know their job, to get to us the specifications, and we after look for the suppliers who would just, build or create the parts that we actually need. So that was something unusual that I got to know, which was interesting, how the business works. So this is my second and third attachment. This is just a few pictures. On the central one, I put the main product of Kristinehamn. This is a propeller, and this is the most successful business that Rolls-Royce had, even after the oil price collapse. The Kristinehamn business was still profitable, and they're very proud of this particular propeller. So it's a propeller for water jets, mainly for bigger ones. So another project I was working for was electrical starters benchmark. It was again, the same approach you take. You receive the specifications from the engineer, and you start having the conversation. You analyze the market, so you look mainly Google search, or you talk to your senior colleagues in my case, if they can advise me on the supplier to contact. You send their non-disclosure agreement, and you start discussions over the phone. You have Skype meetings. In and out, data is sent. You also have to collaborate a lot with the technical team in Norway or Sweden. And on these pictures, you can see some of my pictures from my trips to the supplier. One of the suppliers, so the top picture is from Estonia, and the bottom picture is from Bergen. So I was very much into traveling just to get to know the products. So there it was a meeting with my technical teams, or to the supplier to finally sign their contract after all the discussions and the price agreement was in place. And my third attachment, I would just briefly say, was in Sweden. So I lived almost 6 months I spent in Sweden. It was an operational buyer role. So this is a completely different type of purchasing, because strategic purchasing is something where prices are discussed, terms are continuously have to be agreed, and sometimes it's in and out, especially when it comes to legal parts, liabilities, terms and conditions. And operational purchasing is already involved in the very last stage, where everything is agreed and in place. You just put the prices in the system, and people who work in the operational purchasing department take the data on the daily needs, what has to be purchased, and send out their purchasing orders to the suppliers in the system, monitor that they are delivered on a timely manner, with agreed pricing, of course. So this was my task, sending out the purchase agreements, following up if everything was on track, in place. If there were any delays, and there were delays, you have to get on call, you have to travel, because some of the suppliers were locally. You just go there and you talk to them, what is the issue, and try to make sure that your parts, even if there is a problem with the supplier, are the first to be delivered, not any other company. So that's why the relationship with the suppliers are very important with this in this job, and face-to-face meetings are usually the best. Yeah, so that was a great time, which I presented myself well, and I got a job offer to stay already in the company as a buyer, as a strategic buyer, not within the graduate program, because it was already end of those 2 years. But in 2019, so a year and a half ago, the company Rolls-Royce was going through a very difficult time, Rolls-Royce Marine especially. So they sold Rolls-Royce Marine division to Kongsberg, Kongsberg Group, and now we belong to Kongsberg Marine, commercial marine, so not defense, because Kongsberg has 2 parts of marine: defense and civil. So we work for civil, which is like, more for commercial type of vessels. And on this map, this is actually the map that I prepared myself. Yeah, it took a bit of time, but this is a map that shows how global the company is. And as I mentioned, for purchasing departments, for those who are involved in procurement, it's very important to have a good relationships and to make sure people know you, that you know them, you know their needs. Because usually people, if they can buy something or purchase by themselves, they're not gonna ask you, hey, can you find me a best supplier? So you have to let them know that you are there for them, and that you can actually make their life easier and make the prices better, their quality of the orders, of the products better, and so on. So within such a scale as you see on this map, that we have offices all around the world, it shows that this type of jobs, working in supply chain, is really international, and it gives you an exposure to different business cultures. Maybe you don't have a chance always to travel, but you're still involved in different projects with people around the world, and you feel the difference in the cultures. Like, you may think that Norwegian and Swedish cultures are pretty much the same, but no. Especially after living in Sweden, I felt the difference, that Swedes they're still warmer than Norwegians are. They are more laid back when it comes to getting things done. They like to plan it, so go step by step, making sure things are done. Norwegians are rather impatient. They just want to get to the final point. That's why they don't want to spend 2 hours with you or 1 hour on the call. They prefer you to rather come to see them in the office, to have a cup of coffee and just talk. Instead of like Swedes, they're okay with having Skype conversations and presentations and talk through the phone. So it's like one of the difference, yeah. Or like Norwegians also, they, for example, would always leave at 4 p.m. Even if there is something has to be done, they would still, no, it's 4 p.m., I have to go. Swedes, on contrary, they are fine with staying slightly longer. They have each Friday fika, it's a tea time with your colleagues. Every week someone else is gonna bring something. So it's really interesting to see this difference between countries who are so close to each other, who are like, yeah, basically sometimes maybe pursued as the same, but indeed they are quite different. So as a business culture and as people as well. So so within Kongsberg, as I've mentioned, I have already permanent role as a strategic buyer, and I'm back to indirect function. I was supporting mainly consumables category and facility management. So facility management meaning rental of all the buildings that we have. It's a huge category. It's like over 10 million pounds or 12 million euros annual spent only for Norwegian and Swedish sites. So it gives you a scale that those suppliers are important. And the tricky part of that category, at least for me, is that it's not that easy to move, even if you find the cheaper building, to move the whole site to another location, right? So you have to think, where are the other ways to cut the cost or to make their current services more efficient, to maybe merge the sites sometimes that was on the table back in March, February, what to do with some of the sites. So yeah, and it's very, very rigid category, I would say. The goods, there are not like goods, it's services and rental facilities. And second category is consumables, very different. It's mainly those toilet papers, coffee machines, or pens or screws that you use to put the bolt in, even though the bolt and the nut is a direct category, but screws are indirect. There you have another challenge that you have too many suppliers, too many standard products, and to understand whether you can move them around shift, you just try to merge and synergize all the products as much as possible within one supplier. So there you have a big spend and you can leverage, you can get a better price, get a deal based on the amount of spend that you have with this particular supplier. So you want to push everything in one basket, let's say, as much as possible. So again, working with the different categories in purchasing gives you really like different mindset, or like opens up you to look at different products in a different way, because every category has particular approach that you should take in order to get to the target and get the results that you would like to achieve. So yeah, that's Kongsberg, and my current job and my boss. You may not see him in live, but this is him. And Alex, he's 4 months old. He is great. I love him. He's sometimes demanding, not as demanding as my job. So what I would just highlight here, if anyone is considering international career, international, like moving to a different country, important aspect to consider is the social benefits and social system, let's say, that particular country that you're thinking about have. Because like for me, Poland is quite a good place to give a birth to a kid, because they guarantee you with the paid leave, maternity leave, 100% paid for half a year and 60% paid for the following half year if you decide to stay at home longer with your kid. As to my knowledge, I know that in the States it's not the case. I don't know about if all the students are from the States who are attending this conference call, but this is a big plus, and believe me, this matters, because in the end of the day, this is something that important. You will still have your family life at some point if you decide to start family, or in Poland, again, you have a 25 days off paid leave per year, which is also quite long leave comparing to other countries, in the States, especially, again, if we compare it to States. And in Europe in general, this is better, but when it comes to maternity, paternity leave, having paid leave for half a year is a great thing. So if you might, like girls, make a note if you ever gonna go somewhere. I was maybe a bit rushing, but if you have any questions, I'm very glad to answer or to give some more details.
Well, thank you, Katya. Look at the bottom of your screen, you see a chat. So if anybody has a question, we'll field the questions after both Katya and Conrad have presented. So put your question into the chat, and then I will read them off for both Katya and Conrad after Conrad has finished. Once again, thank you, Katya. It's very interesting. And here comes Conrad.
Welcome. Okay, first of all, I'm going to try and see if I can share my screen, because I tried to send my presentation, but the PowerPoint is larger than I was allowed to send by email. So let me see if I can share this. Okay. we go. This looks like it should be possible. Let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Success, Conrad. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to be talking about my job as a data analyst working for UBS, which is an investment bank. And it's very different from Katya's job because, Kongsberg, they actually make things. We don't really make anything. What we deal with is data and information, right? And we just process information and present it in a way that can give, our clients leverage in terms of making decisions about where to invest money. So before I go on to talk about my job, I'll just start by kind of giving you a summary of my life up until now. So I've got the flags here of all the countries that I've had the opportunity to live in over the past 36 years. And see, in the top left, you have the Polish flag and the US flag. So my dad, Tom, is American, as you all know, I guess. And my mother is Polish, and so I was born here in Poland. And for the first few years of my life, I grew up in Poland, and then the U.S. Polish was actually my first language. I didn't learn English until I was 3, so, but I guess practically that's the same. Yeah, so afterward, thanks to my dad's international career, working for universities abroad, we moved around quite a bit. So we lived in Japan for 5 years, and in the bottom left, that's the flag of Singapore. So I also lived in Singapore for 5 years. That's where I went to high school and graduated from high school. Let's see, after that, I'll talk about my education in the next slide, but I've also had the opportunity to live in Scotland, which is the blue and white flag, and then England to the right of that. And I also included, I don't know how many of you will recognize the flag in the top right. It's not really a separate country. It's the state flag of Alaska, but I spent 4 months there kind of living basically in the wilderness in a town basically cut off from the world, where you can only get there by flying or taking a boat. And it's probably the most exotic place I've ever lived. So that's why I kind of threw it in here. And, sometimes you don't have to go abroad in order to experience something completely different. So in terms of my education, initially I studied at Carleton College, which is the left-hand picture there. Small liberal arts school in Northfield, Minnesota, just south of the Twin Cities. And I studied political science, international relations. It seemed like kind of the obvious choice, given that I had grown up, in different parts of the world. And I initially thought, well, maybe, I could become a diplomat or something like that. After graduating from Carleton, though, I decided I'd like to come back to Poland. Because I hadn't really been back for more than a few months at a time in many years, and I wanted to kind of reconnect with, my Polish roots. So I studied in Krakow, here where I live now, at the Jagiellonian University, which is one of the oldest universities in Europe. It was established back in the 1300s. And I studied European studies, which is kind of includes everything from history to social science to political science to economics. And at that time, I thought, well, maybe I would go on and work, let's say, for the EU, for instance, in some capacity. But later on, I decided, no, I think maybe I'd like to go back to school again and get a degree in environmental science. This time because of my kind of private interests and hobbies. I love mountains, I love nature, I love climbing. So I thought, why not, try and get a degree that would allow me to have a career that kind of matches my professional and my private interests. So I got a degree in environmental science from the University of Edinburgh. And in terms of my career path, so initially after I completed my first master's in Poland, I got a job because of my because of being bilingual, basically speaking fluent English and Polish. I got a job working for a U.S. government agency that monitors what's going on in countries around the world. Basically, you know, they have people in virtually every country whose job it is to read the newspapers, write summaries of what's going on in the country, in particular as it relates to, let's say, the U.S. Government's policies or reactions to what the United States is doing. So the job basically involved reading newspapers and magazines every day, translating articles from Polish into English. And I did that for about, well, I recently just stopped. So I guess it was about 12 years. But it was kind of a dead end job in the sense that it wasn't really leading anywhere. And like anything, you know, after a while you yearn for change. So that's why I thought, okay, let's, you know, try environmental science. I got this environmental degree, and I started, you know, trying to find a job as a conservationist. So I did some bird banding, for instance. Example here in the picture, which basically, you know, you collect information about birds by catching them, take measurements, you put bands on them, and if people are doing this around the world, all over the place, you know, you build up a pretty substantial database of information about what kind of birds are occurring where. You know, if a bird that has a band is caught somewhere else, then you know where it's been, where it came from. So I did some of this in Alaska as well. Then finally, how I got to where I am now, well, basically due to a family emergency, I had to stay in Poland, and I was just about to take a job catching birds on an island off the coast of Oregon. But because of this family emergency, I had to stay here in Krakow, and I was basically looking around for an interesting job here in my hometown. And without really thinking much about it, I applied for a job as a data analyst. And I got it without kind of much experience at all. You know, the picture on the right is sort of my current working environment, which is very different from the picture in the middle. So I work for UBS, which is one of the largest investment banks in the world. So you may not have heard of UBS, but you've probably heard of other investment banks like Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. I don't really know much about finance or investment banking. During my orientation, when I started this job, the head of the office here said, kind of summing it up succinctly, that our job is to make rich people richer. Didn't really sit well with my morals, but actually, you know, now that I've kind of understood what investment banking is about, it's not just about making rich people richer, but a lot of the clients that we serve are institutional investors, you know, and they invest ordinary people's money, right? Like retirement, for instance, right? So if we can, you know, provide these institutional investors with information that helps them make better investment decisions, well, then that's, you know, helping a lot of people, you know, save money for their retirement, for instance. The map on the right shows kind of the geographic distribution of UBS's offices worldwide. So most of them are in Europe and North America. UBS was originally founded in Switzerland, so it's a Swiss bank, but with a global presence today. And in terms of what I actually do at the bank, we analyze alternative data. So here I've kind of presented a chart that distinguishes between so-called alternative data and traditional data. So traditional data, traditionally, you know, when people were making decisions about whether to buy a given stock or sell, you know, they would look at companies' financial statements, right, press releases, you know, news. They would conduct questionnaires. And alternative data differs from that in that it's basically harnessing all the information that's out there on the internet. You know, so examples of this include like social media platforms. If you want to determine how, let's say you're interested in buying, I don't know, investing in like a luxury brand, like, I don't know, Gucci or Prada or something, right? So you can look at their social media accounts and see how many people are following them. You know, how many people are liking their posts? How many people are sharing their posts, right? If you do that for tons and tons of companies in different sectors, right? That gives you kind of a different type of knowledge or information than any kind of traditional, you know, financial statement, right? It can show you how popular a given brand or company is. So that's just one example. Another one is geolocation. You know, we're all using our smartphones and various applications which are showing, you know, where we are at any given point in time, right? And, you know, these applications hopefully anonymously share this data, and it's available, you know, either it's made available directly by the applications or through other vendors. You know, you can see, for instance, how many people are going into certain stores, right? How many, or you can even look at satellite pictures, for instance, of how many cars are parked outside of Walmart or any other company, right? Which can help you gauge, you know, how well that company is doing. So I work for a department within UBS that's called Evidence Lab, and this is just taken from the from our website. And basically what we do is we scour the internet for various types of alternative data, and basically, you know, alternative data is often very big. It's very unstructured, and you have to put in a lot of work in order to turn it into what we like to call insight-ready data sets. So, you know, where you can, you know, you can make conclusions easily, right? For instance, here's an example of some of the work that we do. You all use Amazon, I'm sure, to buy various products. Well, Amazon has shares publicly. They have for all their different categories of products. They show the 100 best-selling products, right? So, for instance, here we have baby wipes, which I've had the opportunity to become quite well acquainted with recently. But basically, you know, what we do is we go from something like what you can see on the left to what's, you know, on the right. So we scrape the information from Amazon, right? And this is done by writing code that basically well, mimics what a person would do, but a single person wouldn't be able to navigate to all these different web pages and write down all this information. You can write a computer program that does that, right? And then, you know, you can make a chart like the one on the right, which shows how well Amazon's own brands are performing on Amazon in different categories, right? So Amazon has the top selling brand in baby wipes. Right? More people buy Amazon baby wipes than Pampers baby wipes, for instance. And they also have some pretty popular batteries. So we do this for lots and lots of different products. And the difficult thing sometimes is that, you know, you will have a list of products, but you need to connect those products, you know, go from a brand to a parent company, right? Because some companies, they own many, many different brands, right? So if you want to look at sort of, you know, the whole picture of how a company is doing, you need to make those linkages between products to brands to parent companies. So here's another example of a data set that I've worked on. And this one is related to the COVID pandemic. So as the pandemic started to spread in Europe, normally there are no border controls. All borders within the EU are open, and you drive across, you know, from one country to another without, like you do from one state to another. So there was a company, kind of a trucking logistics company, that decided to share its information, the data that it had. Basically, it's collecting information from hundreds of thousands of trucks across Europe, and you know, in real time, basically. And they shared this map. You know, every point on there is a border crossing, and it shows, if you were to click on one of those points, it would show you the waiting time. You know, how much, as countries were closing their borders, you know, and you know, checking, you know, all the traffic that's coming through, you know, you could see, right. So basically, you know, what we did is we were collecting information from this map, and, you know, mapping border crossings to countries, and coming up with you know, with a graph like on the right, where you can show, where you can see like the waiting time, you know, kind of at the peak of the spring, kind of the spring pandemic, right? Where in some countries you had to wait, you know, over an hour at the border on average in order to cross, and how that kind of gradually, you know, got better as the number of cases dropped, right? So this is something that impacts, you know, international commerce, right? Because goods have to be delivered. Another example of a data set is there's a website that shows in real time the movement of, you know, ships around the world. So we collect this satellite data, and you can see, for instance, you know, you can get a good picture of international trade, because most trade is done by sea. So you can see, for instance, how many ships are leaving one port and entering another port, right? So this gives you a picture kind of the changing dynamics of global trade. Another example of a data set, right, is this one also uses satellite data, where you can use satellite images to see the gas flares that are produced in places where oil production is happening. And you can use the number of these gas flares, or the intensity of the flares, as a proxy for oil production, right? So if you have satellites continuously, you know, passing over and taking pictures of these, you know, areas where you have oil production, you know, you can kind of measure the intensity and the number of flares, and see how you know, oil production is increasing or decreasing. This shows, for instance, the number of flare counts in the Permian Basin, which, if you guys don't know, is in Texas. So, and here's the interesting point, for instance, that, you know, our data showed that actually, despite, you know, press kind of reports or announcements that Libya was going to increase oil production, in fact, you know, production has declined, right? Another example of a data set related to COVID, and, you know, this uses some different types of applications as its data source, but basically you can see Here you have like 3 different data sets. So foot traffic around like office buildings, right, is the gray line. So you can see how that dropped off as the pandemic progressed, or most strikingly, the dining out index. Basically, it shows you how many, there's like a website that you can use to make reservations at restaurants, right? And they share data about how many tables are occupied, right? So you can see that, you know, end of March, April, basically nobody was going out to eat, right, in Germany. Right, bad for the restaurant business. Good for Uber Eats. Yeah, so another example of a data set. And the data sets that we work with, that they're, relate to all parts of the world. Recently, we've been doing a lot of stuff with China because, China is the 2nd largest economy. So we track a lot of Chinese websites. Here's another example, for instance, where we look at how Spotify is doing. I'm sure you guys all use Spotify. So Spotify shares information about the top 200 most popular songs in every country where it operates. And basically, what we do is we collect, the number of streams for these 200 songs every day, right? And then, this gives you a picture of how Spotify is doing. So for instance, in the US, Spotify is not growing so much anymore. Whereas if you look at other countries, you can see, very, very strong growth, right? So it seems almost like, in the US, maybe there are more competitors, or it's already kind of, saturated the market. But recently, Spotify growth is down. And Spotify is a public company, so, analysts can use this information to make recommendations about whether investors should buy or sell Spotify stock. Finally, the last example I have here, again related to COVID, we've compared 2 different types of information. One is search interest on Google, and the other one is daily cases in Italy. So this shows, for instance, that, at the beginning of the pandemic, even before any cases were being reported, as the news kind of from China was spreading, suddenly everyone was like, oh my God, what is this COVID thing? We need to find out what's going on. And there was a huge spike in searches on Google for COVID. Interestingly, after a while, even though the number of cases continued to increase, people kind of, their interest kind of dropped off. They got tired of it, or, for whatever reason, right? So, yeah, this is, an example of, these are just some examples of the types of kind of alternative data that we work with. And I guess just as a kind of in a closing, I would like to say that first of all, so my current job involves mainly programming, writing code in Python, which is like the most popular programming language these days. I knew absolutely nothing about Python or programming before I started this job, and now I can kind of call myself a programmer. I didn't have any experience applying for this job, and now here I am doing something that I didn't think I would ever be doing. And when we actually look for people to hire, we often don't look so much at the skills, the hard skills that people have, but more their motivation, their personality. And this is often more important because if you've got a good head on your shoulders, you can learn pretty much anything. So to anybody out there, thinking about changing their careers, or trying to get a job somewhere where they don't have any experience, I would say, well, you have nothing to lose. Go for it, because sometimes those are the people that we're looking for. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Conrad and Katya. Is Katya going to come back? I think we have a few questions for both of you.
Yeah, here she is.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate both of you taking the time to present on your experiences. Often, students think that the only kinds of jobs they can get in the international arena are teaching or diplomats. And in fact, that's a very small minority of what's available. So I appreciate you sharing what you did. So questions. We have a question on language. I know both of you are bilingual and maybe then some. So what's the language that you use when you move from country to country? Is everyone using English? And do you have any advice for how other people with non-EU citizenship can work in Europe? So a language question and a work in EU question.
Okay, I can start with the language question. So as Katya said in her presentation, you know, lots and lots of companies over the last, you know, I don't know, 10 years or so have been moving to Poland and opening up offices here. And the working language in all of these companies is English because it's the international language. We don't expect anyone to speak any other language, you know, at the office. Most of my colleagues here in Kraków are Polish, so you know we speak you know Polish amongst each other. But half of the team that I work with are based in New York, so all of our calls are in English. Yeah, and yeah, so not being able to speak a foreign language is really no barrier to working abroad. At least not here in Krakow.
Yeah. Yeah, because international companies come here and they don't expect you to speak. Of course, some of the job ads requires you to speak German or French in addition to English, right? English is always a requirement to any of those jobs where we speak about international contact or content or, yeah, corporations, right? Multinational corporations. So, but in my experience, sometimes with the supplier, there is a problem, but because Italian suppliers from Italy, they don't really speak that good English. So, but this is just, you know, you're not, it's a funny actually part of my job because sometimes they use Google Translator, you don't really understand the way they talk to you. But within the company, all the stakeholders and yeah, the case that I had was only with the Italian supplier. Yeah, so that there was a slight English language barrier, but apart from that, for sure, English is more than enough for working. Yeah. And
in terms of non-EU citizenship, there are actually quite a few people at my office that were hired from abroad and who did not have a work permit or the right to work in the EU. So I have a colleague from Mexico, you know, who applied for a job here in Poland, halfway across around the world.
mm-hmm.
He was hired. The company sponsored him for a visa. He relocated here, I think,
with his family
and a baby. I think he had like a two-month-old baby at the time. I have another colleague from Azerbaijan, same story. I think he was working in Dubai or Qatar, and he was also, you know, hired here without the right to work. And the other way to get the right to work is like Katya,
yeah,
study in Europe.
Study in Europe. At least a 1-year program, master's program, for example, would be sufficient. Then you get a right. In some countries, not indefinite. In Poland, it's indefinite. I have a right to work in Poland till the end of my life, but some countries limit you to 1 year. And if within 1 year after finishing your studies, you didn't find a job, then you automatically lose this right. So basically they give you 1 year to find a job in the EU, but it varies across EU countries. So
I have another question for you, for both of you. Did you choose your career in order to enable you to work internationally?
in my case, yes, very much. Very much. I would say that I didn't have a clear vision or feeling that I want to do procurement, but because I was sure that I love being in an international environment, I love traveling, I like communication and being exposed to different cultures, different sometimes languages, or this dynamic that is still present more in multicultural environment than in monocultural. I just decided, okay, I'm gonna go with this program and see how it goes. So that's very true for me.
In my case, I think maybe not so much because, I don't know, living, abroad and traveling, that's kind of the norm for me. So I don't really know like another life where you're just, in one country. So I don't think I even thought about that because, having an international life is kind of, that has been my life from the beginning. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, both of you. And I take it that little Alex did not wake up.
That's very good news. Yeah.
I'm sure that in 20 years, if we all check back, I'll be very curious to see what kind of career Alex pursues given the multilingual environment he's going to grow up in and both of your parents' experiences. So he's got an exciting life ahead of him. Thank you again for two very interesting presentations on what it's like to work internationally and in some areas that I think many of us had no idea about what it is that you do. I appreciate that. Thanks again.
I think.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us,
For your time.
and yeah, it was nice to share. So
I want to invite everyone who's here to come back next week on the 20, help me out here, Jeanette. It's Wednesday, right?
21st.
Thank you, John.
You bet.
21st, where we will have Gloria Lecoeur, who's going to be presenting on headlines from Uganda. And there's a lot of interesting things going on there, especially with the ongoing problem with refugees and also on how they're handling the COVID crisis as well. Thank you all. We'll see you back next week.